Understanding conflict-driven displacement. One of the most significant contributors to the global refugee crisis is conflict-driven displacement. Armed conflict, whether interstate or civil, often results in large-scale displacement, as people flee violence, persecution, and the destruction of their homes and communities. While the reasons for conflict-driven displacement are varied, it is clear that the scale and duration of displacement are often determined by the intensity of the conflict and the capacity of the international community to intervene. The following case studies highlight some of the most prominent ongoing refugee crises, demonstrating the complexity and long-term consequences of conflict-driven displacement. These examples underscore the need for comprehensive and sustainable solutions to address the challenges faced by displaced populations. Syria's civil war, which began in 2011, is one of the most devastating and protracted conflicts of the 21st century. The war has resulted in the displacement of over half of Syria's population, with more than 6.5 million Syrians fleeing the country to seek refuge in neighboring countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. Within Syria, millions more have been displaced internally, forced to flee their homes and seek refuge in camps or informal settlements. The scale of the displacement is staggering. Entire cities have been destroyed, and the conflict has resulted in widespread human rights violations, including chemical weapon attacks, airstrikes on civilian infrastructure, and the targeting of humanitarian aid convoys. The war has fractured the country along ethnic, religious, and political lines, and the lack of a comprehensive peace agreement has led to a prolonged and unresolved refugee crisis. For those who have fled the country, life in exile has been marked by uncertainty and hardship. Refugees in neighboring countries often face challenges such as limited access to education, healthcare, and employment opportunities. Host communities, too, struggle with the economic and social strain of hosting large numbers of refugees, which has led to tensions in some areas. As of 2023, the Syrian conflict is far from over, and many of the refugees who fled the violence in 2011 remain in a state of limbo. The possibility of return seems remote, as Syria's infrastructure and governance have been decimated by years of war, and the safety of returnees cannot be guaranteed. This protracted displacement continues to pose significant challenges for both the refugees and the international community. In 2022, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine created the fastest-growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. The conflict displaced over 14 million people, both within Ukraine and across Europe, as millions of Ukrainians fled the violence and sought refuge in neighboring countries. Among the displaced, women and children make up a large portion of those affected, and many continue to face the ongoing challenges of displacement, including access to housing, education, healthcare, and legal support. Ukraine's displacement crisis is unique in that it involves a European country in the midst of a large-scale, ongoing conflict. The rapid displacement of millions of people has strained the capacities of neighboring countries, which have had to provide emergency assistance and shelter to large numbers of refugees. The European Union, alongside various international organizations, has provided support through humanitarian aid, temporary protection schemes, and resettlement programs. However, the scale of the crisis has exposed gaps in the international community's capacity to respond to mass displacement. Despite these challenges, Ukraine's refugee crisis also highlights the importance of solidarity and cooperation in addressing displacement. Countries like Poland, Romania, and Hungary have opened their borders to Ukrainian refugees, providing them with shelter, food, and other forms of assistance. The European Union has also implemented a temporary protection directive, which grants displaced Ukrainians the right to stay in EU countries for up to 3 years with access to social services. Nevertheless, the long-term prospects for Ukrainian refugees remain uncertain. As the war continues, many refugees are unable to return home, and their future remains tied to the outcome of the conflict and the stability of the region. Afghanistan has been the site of multiple waves of displacement over the past few decades, with millions of people fleeing the country due to war, persecution, and human rights violations. The situation became even more dire in 2021 when the Taliban regained control of the country, triggering a new wave of fear and displacement. The rapid collapse of the Afghan government, coupled with the Taliban's return to power, left many Afghans, particularly women, ethnic minorities, and human rights defenders, facing increased threats of violence, repression, and forced displacement. Thousands of Afghans sought to flee the country in the wake of the Taliban's takeover, with many attempting dangerous journeys to neighboring countries like Pakistan, Iran, and beyond. The crisis has been compounded by widespread poverty, limited access to humanitarian aid, and the breakdown of basic services. For many Afghan refugees, the future remains uncertain as they face a lack of legal protection and limited opportunities for resettlement. The situation in Afghanistan highlights the challenges of protracted displacement and the difficulty of finding durable solutions. Many Afghan refugees have been displaced for decades, and the ongoing instability in Afghanistan makes it unlikely that they will be able to return home anytime soon. This has created a generation of refugees living in uncertainty, with limited prospects for integration into host countries. In 2023, Sudan was plunged into a new conflict when the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, engaged in violent clashes. The fighting has led to widespread displacement, both internally and across borders, with hundreds of thousands of Sudanese fleeing to neighboring countries like Chad and South Sudan. The conflict has exacerbated an already dire humanitarian situation, with refugees facing extreme poverty, violence, and a lack of access to basic services like food, water, and healthcare. Sudan's displacement crisis is complicated by the country's history of internal conflict and political instability. The long-standing tensions between various ethnic and political groups, combined with the economic collapse and weak governance, have created a fragile environment for refugees and displaced populations. The fighting between the SAF and RSF has further destabilized the region, making it even more difficult for displaced individuals to find safety and support. The situation in Sudan is a reminder that many refugee crises are not isolated events, but are part of ongoing cycles of violence, instability, and displacement. Sudanese refugees, like many others, face a future filled with uncertainty, and the international community's response will need to address not just immediate humanitarian needs, but also the underlying causes of the conflict and displacement. The Palestinian refugee crisis is one of the longest-standing displacement crises in the world, dating back to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the establishment of the State of Israel. Over the decades, millions of Palestinians have been displaced, and many have lived as refugees in camps in neighboring countries, including Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. The ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict has perpetuated the displacement of Palestinians, and the situation in Gaza and the West Bank remains precarious. The Palestinian refugee crisis exemplifies the challenges of protracted displacement, as Palestinians have been living in exile for generations. The lack of a political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, combined with the continued violence and insecurity, makes it difficult for refugees to return home or find a lasting solution to their displacement.